Scar's legacy in the Lion King franchise can really be confusing at times. While Kovu was his heir, the movie never outright claims that Scar had any actual children. That being said, the fact that he had been king of the Pride Lands for a year or more means that it would have been odd for him to have not had any children at all. After looking at the villainous lion's family tree, though, things have become much clearer, so stick around as we take a look at all of the cubs that Scar fathered during his time in the Lion King. As you know, Scar was one of two lions in line for the throne at the beginning of The Lion King, which is solely because of his family lineage and its significance within the history of the Pride Lands. Going back as far as we can through Scar's lineage, the oldest ancestor of Scar that we know of wasn't actually the king of Pride Rock, though. In The Lion Guard, we learned that Scar's ancestor, Ascari, was the second-born son of the king at the time, and ended up becoming the first official leader of the Lion Guard. Down the line rose Scar's grandfather, Mahatu, who would eventually become the king of Pride Rock that was known for helping the animals survive through a terrible drought. He would then pass the throne down to his son and Scar's father, Ahadi, who continued to care for the animals and watch over the territory known as the Pride Lands. Ahadi had two sons, Mufasa and Scar, which brings us to the events in The Lion King. We saw Mufasa as the king carry on his legacy by fathering his newborn son Simba, who would eventually become the most well-known king of the Pride Lands. But what about Scar? What cubs would be born that could carry out his legacy and continue his bloodline? Even though it hasn't been mentioned in the Lion King canon, there's actually a pretty good chance that Scar had multiple cubs before Simba ever returned to the Pride Lands. It's important to note that since it hasn't been confirmed to be canon, the idea of Scar having cubs is technically just a theory, but it's one that's backed by a bunch of evidence. This is especially supported when you start to break down each of the cubs that could have been Scar's after all. First off, it's important to point out the elephant in the room here, or should I say lion. Scar obviously was an anthropomorphized lion, but at the end of the day, he was still a big cat whose animal instincts to claim dominance often took control. As a lion who seemed like he needed to be the king and appeared to desire proving that he was the superior lion between him and his brother Mufasa, he would most likely have been very driven to extend his bloodline. There's a good chance that he would have used his power as the king of Pride Rock to sway some of the lionesses into bearing cubs for him. I mean, we already know of at least one lioness who would have done anything for King Scar, and that's Zira. Interestingly enough, there's even a scene from the original cut of The Lion King that didn't make it into the final movie that shows Scar expressing his need to have a child. It was a really creepy scene that involved Zazu and Nala, and I for one am glad that it didn't make it into the movie. But either way, it's clear that Scar was the sort of person, or lion, that would have wanted to have children simply for the sake of raising an heir and leaving behind a legacy to be remembered. What's even more interesting is that there are actually fan theories that suggest a few specific characters from The Lion King and The Lion King 2 were fathered by Scar. Three of these lions visually looked like Scar, and one I never would have guessed about. However, it makes a lot of sense the more that I think about it. But who could these lions be? Starting with the eldest lion that was most likely one of Scar's children, this theory suggests that the termite-infested Nuka was one of Scar's many cubs. This one seems the most obvious just based on the way that the two lions physically appeared and the way that Nuka carried on Scar's ideals in the Outlands. Now, you could suggest that Nuka was only following after his mother Zira, who clearly was ready to burn the Pride Lands to the ground in the name of Scar. But it wouldn't be shocking to find out that if Scar was his father, Nuka was also inspired by his reign, and he wanted to carry out his father's legacy. Now, it goes without saying that Nuka and Scar were practically identical, which would make sense if the elder lion's genes were passed down. Both Nuka and Scar were depicted as having slightly darker fur than the other lions like Simba or Mufasa, not to mention the fact that they both had stark black manes and were depicted as being much skinnier than the other lions in their prides. Again, this could just be because both Scar and Nuka happened to be in a situation where food was likely scarce for them, with Nuka being in the Outlands and Scar being an outsider in the Pride Lands. But I don't think it's worth discounting the idea that Nuka was one of Scar's children, even though it's just a theory. And do you know what it would mean if Nuka really was one of Scar's cubs? It means Vitani was one of his children as well. And again, though it's just a theory, it's one that I could see being accurate. In The Lion King 2, they never mentioned that Nuka and Vitani were Scar's children. But when you think about Scar's connection with Zira, it doesn't feel too far-fetched of a theory for them to be the children of Scar. Now, Vitani would have been a slightly different case compared to Nuka. While Nuka would have been old enough to have known Scar as a leader and, in this case, a father, Vitani would have been much too young. In the movie, she appeared to be around the same age, if not younger, than Kovu and Kiara. This would mean that Vitani wasn't even born by the time that Scar was killed by the hyenas at the end of the first movie, so she wouldn't have been raised by the lion at all, which means all of her ideals were passed down to her from Zira, which just happened to be the same as Scar's. That being said, Vitani also had a lot of the same physical traits Scar had, such as the darker colored fur and the deep yellow eyes. I know there's not as much evidence for Vitani being Scar's cub as there is for Nuka, but the fact that they both had Zira as their mother could also serve as proof in a way. Again, The Lion King 2 never mentioned an official relationship or anything of the sort between Scar and Zira. They simply hinted that Zira had an obsession with the late lion. But according to this theory, Zira and Scar were a couple, and the pair had multiple cubs together, which, as mentioned before, included Nuka and Vitani. But would you believe me if I said there were even more of Scar's cubs to be on the lookout for? The one lion that definitely shouldn't surprise you, despite it never being confirmed out loud that Scar was his father, was the lion that Scar named as his heir, Kovu. Kovu was a great addition to the cast in The Lion King 2, and as explained by Zira in the movie, he was supposedly handpicked by Scar to take over as the next ruler of the Pride Lands. Obviously, that never ended up happening since Simba returned and gave Scar the boot that led to the hyenas turning against him and munching on him, but that still left some fans wondering why Scar would specifically choose Kovu to be the next king. The simplest answer would be to assume that Kovu was Scar's child. Not only did Kovu look almost exactly like Scar, with them sharing the same dark-colored fur and black manes, but he even seemed to be as cunning as Scar was in the movie. Remember, Kovu originally planned on using Kiara and her affection to get close to Simba and kill him, which is exactly something that Scar would think of to try. Thankfully, that didn't end up coming to fruition because Kovu had a change of heart and fell in love with the young lioness, thus learning to respect Simba. But it's hard to argue against the idea that Kovu was Scar's son, even if it wasn't mentioned in the movie. Now, there is one more lion that some fans think may have been fathered by Scar. But are you sure you're ready to hear this one? It might shock you to learn that some fans think that Nala was one of Scar's children, and if that's true, then it would bring a whole new level of strange to The Lion King. This theory is one that's mostly based on how male lions typically act after they become the new leader of a pride. In the wild, when a male lion becomes the new dominant animal in a pride, he will typically kill or banish any cub in the pride that he wasn't the father of. This is their way of limiting the amount of competition that they have as the dominant lion and the leader, while also spreading their strong genes onto the next generation. The reason why this behavior is so important when considering the idea that Nala was one of Scar's children is the simple fact that Nala appeared to be the only surviving cub from Simba's generation after Scar took over from Mufasa. When Simba returned to the Pride Lands, there seemed to be no lions that were around his age aside from Nala, implying that if there were any cubs when Scar took over, then he did indeed wipe them out. However, according to the theory, he chose to spare Nala because she was actually his own daughter and therefore was no threat to him. Now, this theory would make things really weird for Simba and Nala because I'm pretty sure that means they would be cousins. So I don't think Disney would ever consider making Nala and Scar's familial ties canon. Not to mention the fact that when they were first writing The Lion King, the creators were going to have Scar make some creepy advances toward Nala. Let's not forget that part. So ultimately, I don't think that she would be considered one of Scar's children. As for Nuka, Vitani, and Kovu, though, I most certainly wouldn't be surprised if Disney canonized them as Scar's cubs in the future. What do you think, though? Did Scar have any cubs while he was king of the Pride Lands? And if so, what happened to them? Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below.